For many of you who have followed the Tiara Talk Show podcast since 2013 or have seen my tweets on Twitter, you know that there's a particular animated Disney film that I love to talk about and learn more about. So, with the 20th anniversary right around the corner, it's time to get back to Atlantis. So this week we will be talking to the guardians of Atlantis itself, directors Kirk Wise and Gary Trousdale, and screenwriter Tab Murphy. Welcome to the show, all three of you guys.
Thank you.
It's Guardians?
Yes.
No, wow. We did not do Guardians of the Galaxy.
I thought we were like, 100 feet high and made out of chiseled rock. The giant force field.
There you go.
Well, you guys were the protectors, I guess, of Atlantis because you originally created this idea in a Mexican restaurant, and Gary gave the tidbit it was called Chevy's. So
that's right.
Why don't we talk a little bit about that meaning, if you guys can discuss a little bit more about the, how it originated from that conversation. What was the beginning topic? Was it, what should we do? Or was it these ideas that you had been throwing around and said, okay, we have to come together and let's hash this out?
Well, I think, at least based on my recollection, this is Kirk, by the way, I think we just got together to just brainstorm, to just spitball ideas that we might have that we thought would be fun for a follow-up to Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was such a good experience on Hunchback of Notre Dame that we really wanted to keep our crew together, all of our artistic supervisors in all the departments. We really loved. They were really great. We were really a well-oiled machine on Hunchback, and so we thought we really need to get a project going right away, so that this team doesn't get dispersed to the four winds and end up on a bunch of different projects, and we never get to work with them again, for another 5 years. So that, I think that was one of the reasons for the meeting, is that we wanted to get another project going right away.
This is Gary. Don Hahn had also mentioned. This was kind of his effort to get us together at this. He's the one that said we've just done two movies that were kind of okay. If we want to do something of our choice, we have to think of it ourselves rather than be assigned a project by the studio. So it was Don like kind of lighting a fire under us to let's think of what we can do. What do we like to do? And all the stories about the margaritas and chips and salsa are absolutely true.
Yes, I believe I had enchiladas. Chicken.
This is Tab. I don't remember what I had, but I remember having a great time at that meeting, because I think that even by that time, that particular meeting, I think we had all settled on the idea of a boy's own adventure. I mean, in my recollection, now that I could be fuzzy a little bit about that, but it's interesting to hear Gary talk about Don, coming and saying, guys, this is on us this time out the gate. We're not going to, we got to come up with something. But I think that's not something you're used to hearing in the halls of Disney back in those days at that particular time, because it had all been adaptations of fairy tales and this and that. So I think personally that's a testament to Kirk and Gary and the cachet they had at the studio at that time. These are two guys, along with Don, who had alerted Hollywood in a big way that animation was more than just cartoons, with Beauty and the Beast, getting a Best Picture nomination. And then going on and doing, which I was lucky enough to be a part of, Hunchback. And by the time those two movies, and as Kirk mentioned, looking for the next project, I think, they had, that we were kind of playing with house money a little bit, with the idea of like we were invited to come up with something, and they were open to that. And I think that was just such an incredible kind of opportunity for this movie, for Kirk and Gary and Don and even myself to be a part of. So that's my recollection.
It seems because both of you, Kirk and Gary, you're coming from a wonderful stream of films with, Beauty and the Beast, and then followed by The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And I always like to pinpoint, Cranium Command as something you guys did, way before Beauty and the Beast. And I love that in Epcot. So for listeners who don't know what Cranium Command is, please go on YouTube and take a look at the beginning film and the entire attraction, because it's something special. I love it. I miss it.
Yes.
But with this particular project, you're going on with no musical numbers, a character-heavy cast, an action story. So it checks off none of the Disney cliches that we immediately, usually think of, except probably that the mother dies, but in this retrospect, it's in front of the child. We actually watch it happen. So
She didn't die. She didn't die per se.
Totally dropping out.
She
ascended.
Ascended and was transformed.
There's so many different cliches that are not checked off. So I don't know, in retrospect, what did the Disney studio think of it when you pitched the idea? What was this pitch meeting like after you kind of, threw together kind of like a breakdown of how you wanted to take this particular story?
The initial pitch meeting, I think, went as smoothly as we could have hoped for. We had the, between the four of us, we had kind of crafted this line, that it was based upon the Disney live action classics of the 60s. The Walt was putting together like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Swiss Family Robinson, and really non-fairy tale, non-musical, exciting, adventure stories. And that, I think, struck a nerve with the high command, and they bought it.
I think another thing they responded well to, and we came up with this very early on in its development, is that we pitched it with a Disneyland metaphor, and we said, for the past 10 years, animation has been making movies that take place in Fantasyland. You walk down Main Street, you go straight through the castle, and you're in Fantasyland. What if we turned left at the end of Main Street and went into Adventureland and made a movie there? And that they really leaned in and said, okay, tell us more. That I think that was a really simple and gettable idea for the studio, and I think that really kind of opened their minds and their ears to the possibility of making a movie like this.
My perspective, it's Tab again, is more of a sort of practical boots on the ground. What happened, because after that particular lunch meeting, I went away and I brought the guys like 6 sort of story ideas, capsules of what it could be. And we didn't even know. I mean, I found this document, by the way, not too long ago, the first iterations of Atlantis.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. And I, at the end of these capsules, I'm like, I say, I'm looking at this, and here are a few possibilities that our heroes may be searching for under the earth: the Holy Grail, Thor's hammer, Pandora's box, Inca and Lost Gold, Blackbeard's treasure, sunken continent of Lumeria. I mean, we were all over the map early on, and so
we were. I give them that.
What was cool is that I kind of just went ballistic and creatively crazy and brought Kirk and Gary and Don these sort of 6 capsulized ideas of what the story could be. And they were like, it was great because they sort of cherry picked a lot of ideas from the very different capsules and thought, whoa, that sounds cool. And then, so they kind of then turned it back to me and said, okay, we like these things from all of this stuff. Bring us a version of one that kind of contains all these ideas. And so that was really the beginning, the genesis of what led to ultimately us, turning in, I think it was like a 25-page treatment. It was a long treatment, yes. I remember. My most vivid memory is we had turned that treatment in, and they had called a meeting, and we were sitting in this room, conference room, and it was Don and Kirk and Gary and myself, and we were just kind of sitting there, and it's the old cliche of fingers drumming on the desktop, because we were all like, what are they going to think? I mean, I hope, you never know. I mean, like they could come in and say, guys, nice start, needs a lot of work. You get that a lot, right? Well, my memory is that Peter Schneider led Tom Schumacher into that meeting, and he had a copy of the treatment, and he threw it in the middle of the table, and he said, "This is the best effing thing I've read in a long time."
That was Peter?
Yeah.
Whoa. Wow, I had not. That's amazing. I hadn't heard this story because
you were there, dude. You were there.
Oh my God!
But he said. Then he began to say, "I was on a plane. I read it on a plane, and I couldn't stop." And blah blah blah. And the enthusiasm, it just was like the room just relaxed, and we all looked at each other, and we in that moment, I think we all thought, we got a movie here. We're going to make a movie, because the support that they showed in that meeting to us was amazing.
There is no way this type of film would ever be able to be made at Disney. And the fact that you had all of these green lights to go ahead and really test the waters on something that was totally different. I can only imagine the response by the animators and the rest of your crew and the divisions. What did they think when they heard that this was a polar opposite of a usual Disney film?
I think for the most part, we got a lot of support from our crew. I think they were very excited at the chance to do something that was in a different genre and was going to be told in a different visual style. And so I think by and large, the response was positive. I know when we put together our initial pitch boards, there are some folks at the studio who I don't think were working on the movie who were a little skeptical of it, who didn't really think there was anything there. But by and large, at least I recall our crew, the ones that we carried over from Hunchback, were very excited about working on the movie.
What he said, yes. It kind of got the imagination of the crew like it did, the higher ups. It's like, wow, this is something different. And when we brought in Mike Mignola for design and a look of film, people got really seriously excited.
I would just add that, I was not sort of like day to day in the office around the crew, as obviously Kirk and Gary were. I was more like the character of Moliere. I would come and we'd talk about things, and I'd go back into my little cave, my little hole, dig down, and then emerge when I had something new to show the guys. So later in the process, a little bit later, I was invited very generously by Kirk and Gary to participate in story meetings with animators and things like that. I was kind of involved in the script writing process at that point, but they would have me come in, which was very useful because so many ideas come up in the room from so many creative people involved. And for me to be able to be in the situation of somebody pitching ideas or a storyboard or whatever, that I could then take and put into the script writing process was just invaluable. It was great. And it's just also just one of the most creatively fertile experiences I've ever had, in my life in terms of those movies that I made with these guys. So it was a lot of fun.
And speaking of script, how long did it take to get a final script in place and then begin right into production?
I'm laughing at the word final.
Well, tell me about that. So how does that work? Because do you need a final script to start animating? How does that work?
Well, from my perspective, I'll let Tab jump in, but from my perspective, working in animation is an extremely collaborative and very fluid process, and there comes a point fairly early on in the process where the animation process is initially driven by the treatment and the first few drafts of the screenplay. And then as the boards start to get developed, it's the storyboards that then kind of take over and kind of drive the process. And the writer responds to what he sees in the boards and makes adjustments in the script and vice versa. So then it becomes this very sort of hand in glove process, pretty much all the way to the end.
Yes, I mean, and that's why I was laughing, because there's never, in my experience anyway, in the movies that I worked on, the two with these guys, especially, there's never a quote final draft of the script until after the movie's actually been animated, and then they go back through and they mock up a script to reflect the movie more or less.
It's an official document,
basically. Yeah.
Yeah. But listen.
Document.
Yeah. But here's the thing I want to say about Atlantis. I had so much fun writing it, because we sat in the room even before the guys, we had, as Kirk mentioned, there were already people aboard doing work on it, just with the treatment that we sort of had given to the studio. But those guys gave me so much freedom. I mean, I knew there was too much material that we'd already been talking about. Like, most animated features run about 90 to 100 minutes. And I'm like, I think I remember saying before I started, I said, guys, there's so much material here. And they were like, write it, just write it, throw it all in there. It's like, give us a kitchen sink version of this, of everything we've been talking about. So I took them at their word, and I think my first draft was like 151 pages long. It was.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It was huge. So to be able, as a writer, not to have any constraints, to be able to have heard all these great ideas and to be able to work with them all and find a way to weave them into a story without worrying about a page count, was just like a kid in a candy store for me. I mean, I just had so much fun writing that draft.
When you're creating the characters in particular, because sometimes I think that's like the main thing that kind of drives the story, is getting to know the characters and then also traveling with them to Atlantis. So Tab and Gary, how did you guys craft those characters? Because I know, Gary, you had said that you had created some profiles based on what Tab had written.
God, what I mean, I remember we came up with characters. We wanted a broad swath. The overarching idea was that this billionaire philanthropist, who's a little on the nice side, puts together like the best possible team he can possibly get, and they would be a cross section of everybody. I mean, it would be a real kind of Dirty Dozen kind of crew, and I believe we even referenced Dirty Dozen. We looked at we watched a fair amount of kind of ensemble movies and and said, okay, so what jobs would need to be done? We needed a mineralogist or a geologist. We needed a map maker. Well, obviously, okay, mine was going to be the cartographer and the map maker, or translator, blah, blah. But all the other stuff, we need a mechanic, and we're going to, let's see, the ship surgeon, and, all these things. We just, listed down the jobs and then started to fill them with, what would be most fun? Well, the mineralogist, if he literally lived underground, and I think Tab came up with the name Mole, and it kind of went from there. I think Dr. Sweet was Anne Marie's idea, wasn't it? Wasn't he?
Gosh, that's a good question, and you may be right. If my recollection is correct, and Tab, please feel free to jump in. I remember, I think you did sort of the first pass on what the ensemble was going to be. Yeah. And I think that there were a lot of characters that grew out of the visual development department that you incorporated into your subsequent drafts.
Right. I think, in reading some of these early treatments, even before there was visual development, just not even treatments, but just ideas, there were two characters that survived. Vinny, who was called somebody else. I always envision this demolitions guy being busted out of a Turkish prison or whatever, and Cookie. And I always loved Cookie because the idea of Cookie, because of the time period this was set, gave us the opportunity to use characters that may have originated back, that lived in 2 centuries almost. So that's what Cookie was about. He was an old guy, and I always envisioned him as a cook on General Custer's, Bighorn expedition march, who just happened to get away, But yeah,
I think the line we used was that the Cookie made some kind of dish that made Custer sick, and he was fired before the.
Yeah, maybe. But I think my recollection too is like I think Mrs. Packard was kind of a Don Hahn thing, maybe, or maybe that he kind of pitched this old, the idea of this, like old-fashioned, operator in the ship's communication department. I mean, it was the real takeaway here is just how collaborative this whole process is. I mean, I look at that poster and I see screenplay by Tab Murphy. Well, I guess they had to assign it to somebody. But the truth of the matter is, you were asking about characterizations. When I wrote the first draft, imagine the movie with having skeletons, just bones walking around that were the characters, because that's the metaphor. Everybody else brings and contributes to those characters and brings flesh and blood to them and attitudes and emotions and all those things. And I sketch out a skeleton of those ideas in a draft in early variations, but it's that team, and Kirk and Gary looking over everything and sort of steering the ship that brings all of that to life, So
yeah, I think I'll tell sort of an amusing story. In one of Tab's very early drafts, it might have even been the first one, Milo Thatch was in fact a descendant of Blackbeard the pirate.
Yes.
Yes. So you come to this part where you guys have been animating and creating a story, and now it's time to really sell the souls of the characters and who they are, and to make it sound as if this really is a community of characters going and finding Atlantis. So in that retrospect, how do you guys break down who you can bring in and see who would be interested in voicing characters that actually match the character and the emotions themselves?
Well, we went through the casting process. Like we've done on every other movie. We work with a casting director. Ruth Lambert, and she sort of culls from lists of people that agencies would send her. She would bring in actors to audition for the roles that she felt sort of most closely resembled the impression of the characters that we gave her. And it was a long process. I remember the audition process for Atlantis was a long one. We were.
It's always a long one. It's always a really hard thing, because you've got these drawings in front of you, and you want to figure out, okay, how are we gonna, who's going to be the voice? Some of them we kind of knew. I mean, the first Mr. Whitmore was Lloyd Bridges, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. We cast Lloyd Bridges. We even recorded him.
And we recorded him, and he passed like within a couple months of that. And so we had to kind of back up. But like other characters, like I don't remember who. If it was Ruth or if it was Don or who it was that suggested Don Novello for Vinny. And when he came in.
Yeah.
When he came in and read that, it was like, bam, that's it.
Yeah.
There were some that we really had to search for, and some that was like, what the heck? Why didn't we think of this before?
Right.
So
exactly. There were some actors, like Gary said, there were some actors who came in. Who just nailed it, from their first reading, and then their presence and the personality and the quality that they brought to the voice influenced how the character was written and how the character was storyboarded. I know that was the case with Claudia Christian. I remember when she first came in to read for Helga, she nailed it. It's like literally with the first line that came out of her mouth, I was like, oh, Jesus, it's her. She's perfect.
Yeah.
You guys picked like an all-star cast here too, because we go from Michael J. Fox to Claudia Christian to Phil Morris to Corey Burton, who usually is the go-to guy for a lot of animated films and projects. And when you pitched this film to them, because I think a lot of people assume that it's going to be a Disney film, you're going to have to sing. What were their thoughts when they kind of heard that this is something the polar opposite?
I think people were kind of jazzed about it. It's like, hey, we're doing something different. This sounds really cool. I don't think any of the actors felt that we're betraying the Disney the Disney legacy by straying from fairy tales. I think everybody, and I think to Kirk's recollection of the Disneyland metaphor, I think we use that a lot too. That
yes.
We're going to Adventureland instead of Fantasyland. And it worked like a charm. I mean, not that it had to work, but because these guys were, A, they're all professionals, and B, I think they really liked it. Like Corey, we'd worked with for the previous two movies, and we loved Corey, and I think he was probably ready to do, whatever we said. It's like, Corey, we got a part for you, and he was like, all right, I'm in. But I think everybody was like pretty jazzed about it.
I remember that our casting director brought in Bronson Pinchot from to read for Mole, and she was very she was very psyched about that particular actor, and he was funny. He's a funny and talented actor, but it just wasn't hitting us. It just wasn't what we had envisioned, even if we didn't know exactly what we had envisioned at the time.
Yeah.
It just didn't
that
feel
wasn't it.
I have a question, not really a question, but there's a part of this that would fall under the heading of process, and how sometimes you cling to certain things that you get married to early on in the production, and then you have to have a painful divorce. And that is that for the longest time there was a Viking prologue attached to the movie. I would love, because I've heard this secondhand, but I'd love to hear Kirk and Gary talk about that day. And I think was it John Sanford that came in and had a tough talk with you guys? I'd love to hear that story.
Well, there was the sense that as things were moving along, and we were heavy into production at this point. The Viking prologue was fully animated and painted. I mean, it's like in full color. Done production, and a lot of the other film was like well underway as well, and there was a sense that we're just not connecting with the characters in Atlanta. So we're not caring about them as much as we could. We go down there and it's like, oh, look at these guys, and there was no real, no real any kind of connection with them, and. It was after a screening like this that John kind of timidly said, "I think we're telling the wrong story at the beginning. That we need to tell the story of the characters in Atlantis." And so that's kind of how that concept came up. It's like we had to ditch the Vikings, whom we loved. And both of the Icelandic actors that were working in LA at the time, who did all the Viking voices, it was like, God, it was such a cool opening. It was such fun to do, but John was right. And we had to reconceive the beginning, and it was better because of it.
Yeah. It boiled down to we need a reason to care about the Atlanteans. And John was the one who recognized after the screening that Kida was our way in, and he said, in very plain terms, he pitched us the idea of, what if we see Kida and she's 4 years old and she witnesses the destruction of Atlantis and the ascension into the crystal of her own mother, and we listened to it and it was kind of goosebumpy and we could all picture it. And Gary, if I'm remembering correctly, you went home that night and came back the following morning with the entire sequence thumbnailed, on lined notebook paper.
Actually, it was on a bar napkin. I deleted it.
That's what I heard. It was a bar napkin.
Yeah.
That is awesome, dude. Yeah, that's what I've always heard, that you kind of went away and were so inspired that you just mapped out, I don't know how many of the first shots of the film on napkins, and I was like, that's amazing. That's great.
Yeah. I found some of those. I found some of those recently. I was going through some boxes and rearranging stuff, and I was like, son of a gun, look at that. And, there was these napkins with these little ball peen scratchings on them. It's like, yep, I remember. There's the atomic blast and the flying Leviathan and the hammerheads and all that. It's like, yep, I remember this.
I don't mean to take your job, Tammy, but I have a question that I get a lot of over the years, and I'm curious too, because I think in some of my early draft there was this thing, which is, did you guys, in terms of the relationship between Milo and Kida, make a conscious decision not to have them kiss at the end, or and if so, I mean, I think I know the answer, but I'd love to hear your take on that.
Oh, I love this question. Go ahead. Yes.
From my perspective, I and Gary, you can jump in. I remember having the question about whether they should kiss or not, whether Milo and Kida should kiss or not at the end of the movie. And I think our reason for them not kissing was twofold. First, the whole movie was kind of predicated on the premise of, we're going to do something different that you haven't seen in Disney animation before up to this point. And we're going to subvert expectations for what a Disney animated feature could be. And so that was one reason not to do it. And the second reason was the story was about how Milo discovers this incredible lost civilization, and rather than go back to the surface and tell the world, it's about his choice to fight to preserve it and save it. It wasn't the story of Milo, the nerdy map maker, gets a hot girlfriend. And so I think we imply at the end of the movie that yes, these two characters get together. I think when you see the very, very last shot, when Milo's wearing Atlantean garb and he's got a tattoo, he's kind of officially the Queen's consort. So I think we can assume that they got together.
Yeah.
Well, they do hold hands, I think, don't they?
They do hold hands.
Yeah.
That's
and they do
like as they're watching the city reveal, I think they hold hands.
Right, which I thought was brilliant. I thought it was great. I'm glad they didn't kiss.
It's a subtle moment, and again, not a Disney cliche of there's a happy wedding at the end. You know what I mean? Like it's a memorial service.
Yes, exactly. That's a very good point. It is a memorial service. It as opposed to the two characters waltzing and we pull back through the castle windows.
It was more important to show that Atlantis had been restored and preserved than it was to see a couple characters fall in love.
And it's something more gradual and modern, I guess, too, because again, we hit the new millennium the year before the film came out, and things are different and women are different. So having a woman of color become queen or king of her country is something you usually don't see, and with an array of characters that are of different ethnicities and backgrounds, that's something you usually don't see in a Disney film as well too. So
yeah, that is something, that aspect of the film, we should talk a little bit about that, was something that I think all three of us fought for, that we wanted the crew to be diverse in terms of sex, race, age. We really wanted it to be a mixed bag, and we really pushed for Kida to be dark skinned instead of light skinned. We wanted all the Atlanteans to be dark skinned because again, we wanted to subvert expectations and do something different. And not do the typical representation of what Atlanteans might look like. And we just said, okay, what if we just go the other way? And we pushed for that. We had to fight for that. I remember Kita's design in particular was a bit controversial in some of the meetings where we were finalizing the character designs and pitching them to Tom and Peter. Kita wore very revealing clothing and was athletic and strong and pretty sexy for a Disney heroine. Certain executives were a little uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, but the thing I love about Kita, Kirk, and I just to piggyback onto this idea, is that she is unaware of her sexiness.
True.
You know what I mean? She didn't flaunt it. She's just there's an innocence about her still with regard to how she looks and how she carries herself that the 14-year-old boys and all of us kind of salivate over. But that's not what she was about, unlike Helga, who used her sexuality in many ways, or was more in command of it and
right.
The power of it. And this just leads me to another quick point, that another reason why I loved writing Atlantis is because I got to write 4 very strong female characters, all in their own way. So you've got Helga, you've got Kita, you've got Audrey, right? And then you've got Mrs. Packard, who in her own weird way was a very strong character. I mean, so it was a lot of fun, and it just in so many ways for me broke the mold of a lot of things that people had come to expect from a Disney animated movie. Now, maybe that can be attributed to why maybe it didn't do as well as we all hoped it would do when it came out, but. It was, from my perspective and my standpoint of my contributions, my small contributions to it, those were the fun aspects of writing it, for sure.
I think if nothing else, I think it certainly contributed to the movie's longevity. I think we were sort of
absolutely
to pat ourselves on the back. I think we were definitely kind of ahead of the curve on a lot of the choices that we made in terms of characters and characterization for an animated movie.
So when the film finally premiered, there was a big blue carpet ceremony with the El Capitan Theater, and I saw some pictures, and it looked like you guys were all having a full blast because the full cast is there, and they finally get to really meet one another for the first time and see the film. What was that day like?
That was really fun. It was the first time. It's like my memory is that was the first time that we did like a daytime wrap party, and I think that choice was made so that everybody in the cast and everybody in the crew could bring their kids, and that was different. Typically we had evening wrap parties, and you could go and
drink.
Exactly. Yeah, there's that.
I don't believe I went to the premiere. I don't have a memory of that. So I think for whatever reason, I was. No, thank you, but yeah, maybe that's why I don't have a memory of it. No, I think for whatever reason I did not go, and I can't recall why. I might have been traveling out of town or whatever in those days, but I was surely sorry to have missed it. That's for sure.
My memories of it are mostly the blue carpet. Like watching the movie, it's fun, and you get all worked up because you're seeing everybody's work and everybody's seeing their own work and reacting to each other and all that. But it was being out front, everybody all dressed up all fancy for like the group photo, and there's Michael J. Fox, and there's Phil Morris, and there's Claudia Christian, and all these people, Leonard Nimoy, for crying out loud, and we're all out there and having a great big group photo. And to me, that was the really fun part, because I don't think we've ever done anything like that before. We'd never done that with like any of the other. We didn't do that with Hunchback. We didn't do that with Beauty.
That's true.
And this was the first time it was like the crew photo with with the cast, and it was. For me, that was really something.
That's really cool. I know now, as you talk about it, Gary and Kirk, I know where I was. I was in Canada. And even though I didn't get to go to the premiere, I got to do something that was really cool. We were visiting up in Canada, and I took my 7-year-old son at the time, and a gaggle of his friends, and drove into Calgary to a theater on opening weekend. And
oh, wow.
I watched that movie with these boys in a row.
Oh, cool.
They all had popcorn. I had my popcorn. And I got to experience that film as I would have experienced any number of films we all talked about and loved that were the genesis of this film.
Nice.
Atlantis, with them in that theater, and they came out, and the buzz. You remember how you used to emerge from a movie and the buzz was just palpable about the excitement of what you'd just seen and this and that. And that was the most satisfying thing, I think, almost of the whole production for me, was after this long journey to sit in a dark theater and watch it with my son and his friends and have them just eat it up was just amazing. It was amazing. And, I mean, yeah, it was just so cool. And over the years, I don't know how you guys felt, but, I was disappointed that the movie didn't find a bigger audience, I think. And I think it, I kind of wrote a narrative that I kind of, I don't know, that I've been responsible for a movie that in many eyes, including, I'm sure, Executive Studio, failed to perform. And it was disappointing. And then off of that, over the years, I just didn't run into anybody that that talked about it that much. So I just thought, oh man, it's just a movie that I feel so much affection for, that just didn't hit the sweet spot in terms of box office and the kind of momentum that everybody in those days was like anticipating for every movie that got released at Disney. And so I don't want to say that I carried around the stigma that that it was a failure. So it certainly wasn't from a creative standpoint, but it's why it was so weird over this past weekend when, I just made a little post on this Atlantis fan page on Facebook, and suddenly these people just came out of the woodwork with stories about how that movie was so important to them in their childhood and this, and I related to Audrey and all this, and I mean, the outpouring was just amazing. So 20 years later, I finally go, all right, it did find its audience.
I like to think of it as the lost audience during that time period, because we truly were. Because, our films that we grew up were with Tarzan and Emperor's New Groove and Atlantis and Treasure Planet. And so we grew up with these films, and they never get the recognition. And we're all in our 20s, and some of us are in our 30s now. And we have vivid memories of seeing these films in the movie theaters. I clearly remember as a 6-year-old the opening title of the film, watching it in the movie theater, and I just remember that moment, and it stayed with me. And I remember the McDonald's toys, and you could get your own Atlantis necklace with the McDonald's toys, and I still have mine. Wow. I think I brought, and I showed that to you, Gary. When I met Gary, I brought all my Atlantis stuff, and I was like, I can't help it. I just have to show this to you. So, it means a lot to us emotionally. So, I'm so glad, Tab, that you're in the group, because there's so many of us that have, vivid memories of the film. And, in a way, it's an outcast film, with Milo feeling he's an outcast, and I can only assume the crew, they feel more comfortable being with one another than they do with their regular jobs. So I just feel...
I made 2 outcast films with these guys. I mean, if there's a through line or a theme, in terms of the work, at least that we all did together, that's that would certainly be, like Quasimodo, of course, being the ultimate outcast.
Yes, yes.
So there was certainly that part of Milo who felt, but what I loved about Milo is that he had a passion, he had an enthusiasm, and he had a passion, and there was this idea that, that, and you can see it in the sequences these guys directed with him, early on, and that nothing was going to keep him from achieving this goal of finding Atlantis, and anyway, there's so many things. We could talk for another hour, I think.
Can I just mention one thing? When you mentioned that Milo has a lot of passion, there's that one scene where he's talking with the one gentleman from the Smithsonian, and it's David Ogensteyers as the role. And David just delivers these lines that are so perfect, and he has this one line, and you could hear that he does care about Milo. He says, "You have a lot of potential, Milo. Don't throw it all away." And it just makes me think of him and a lot of the other cast members who we don't have today. Florence Stanley passed away, Leonard Nimoy, James Gardner, and more recently John Mahoney.
John Mahoney and Jim Varney.
Yes, and Jim Varney. He didn't even get to see the finished film, right? He only got to see parts of it.
Yeah. Yeah,
we actually had to have a sound effect for his final line.
Yeah, his last line, "It's the bacon grease from the whole trip." That's the sound alike.
Oh, is that right? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're kidding.
Well, I've got a very quick, funny Jim Garner story because years and years and years ago, in the early 80s, I was working at 7-Eleven here in Hollywood, and James Garner used to come in all the time.
Oh, way.
I'll be darned.
The time I worked 11 p.m. to 8 shift in the morning. He would come in at like midnight or 1 in the morning, and he always had a group of young people with him, guys and girls. I don't know if they were his children or what, but and he was just a larger than life dude. And he would come into the store, and he'd just stand at the counter. They'd all get fast, like junk food and stuff, and he'd buy it all. And I just, so for me to actually end up having written a character that he voiced years and years later, that's just it's just like a circle of life moment, boys.
Yeah, I have to admit, it was one of my biggest thrills was that I got to work on a movie that starred both Mr. Spock and Jim Rockford.
Oh yes, exactly.
Yeah, we were at a recording session, and Jim Garner asked, "So when does this picture come out?" And we were still like a year away. We were doing like pickup lines, but we still had a lot to go. And we said at a year, and he was a lot older than he seemed. At that time, he goes, "A year? I don't buy green bananas, boys."
I forgot about that.
That's awesome.
That's so funny.
Another question quickly that I get asked a lot, and this is just a specific detail moment, and I don't really answer it, but is what did Mole whisper to Kida that caused her to slap him or punch him?
Oh, I know exactly what he whispered. We had him whisper, "Voulez-vous coucher avec moi?" But really, really soft.
Well, if they reevaluated Atlantis, they would have to give it a PG-13 rating for one reason. And do you know what that reason probably is? Packard smoking.
Oh, there you go. Yes, I believe. I think we hold the distinction of creating the last smoking Disney character.
Yes,
we had to fight for that one. I recall. I mean, there was some pushback on her smoking, even back in 2001.
I think the thing that we sort of I think we fought that a little bit by saying, guys, we're not exactly glamorizing it.
Right. Yeah, not with her.
Right.
There's this wonderful fan community behind it, and I wanted to hear what you guys wanted to say to them directly in preparation for this 20th anniversary, whatever may happen.
I think for me, first I would just say thank you so much for enjoying the movie, for loving it, and for supporting it as long as you have. I mean, to have people come up to us 20 years later and say, I wore out my VHS copy of this when I was a kid. That means the world to me. It's the whole reason why we make these things. And so I just want to say thanks.
I would echo that. I mean, when you asked that question, the very first thing that popped into my head was thank you. The very first thing I would say is thank you for being the smart ones and for recognizing a really cool movie while everybody else was stupid.
Yeah. Well, I would double echo that. And I would also just say, based on my recent experiences on the fan site on Facebook, that a lot of people are posting stuff that really moved me, frankly.
I got to go to the site.
Yeah, you got to check it out, dude. We're
going to make you the king of Atlantis on Facebook. That will be your name. And we'll put you in there.
People posting things like, I'm an archaeologist today because of that movie. I went to I got a degree in linguistics.
Yeah, you posted that. You posted that video, and that was remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, and from my perspective, and I can imagine from your guys as well, that when you get that kind of feedback, even 20 years later, you just go, wow, something I did mattered to people. That is the best kind of validation, I guess, in some ways, for the work you do at a lonely computer. At least for me, in a lonely desk at a computer where you're just trying to hammer out ideas to make your directors happy. That someday maybe it will have some value to an audience. And so I would echo doubly and just say thank you so much for all the fans. And I wish to God we could go out and make a sequel tomorrow. Yeah, I was disappointed with the critics' reaction too. I mean, I was like going, wow, they just didn't see what we were trying to do, possibly, or they were riding this new wave, as you say, of CGI animation, and they didn't get to laugh as much in Atlantis as they did in Toy Story, or they didn't get a traditional animated feature that they were used to, So anyway, it created a lot of self-doubt in my mind for a number of years about that.
One critic who really got it, believe it or not, was Roger Ebert. He loved our movie.
Oh, you know what?
He absolutely loved it, and he totally got that it was a comic book aesthetic, and he praised us for being so true to that and so consistent with it throughout the entire movie.
Oh, I want to read that now.
Yeah, it's a terrific review. Just look up Roger Ebert's original review of Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and he was one of the few critics out there who completely got what we were going for. And I think it's because he had a tremendous affection for the types of movies that Atlantis was inspired by.
Well, I can't thank you guys enough for doing this, to do a last-minute reunion in preparation for the 20th. And I really hope something does come to fruition where we can bring the three of you and Don and maybe the rest of the cast together in person. Because I think a lot of people would love to see all of you together and even hear more stories. I know we didn't touch everything, so I apologize to the fans, but I'm so glad we got to talk today. So thank you, all three of you, for doing this.
Oh, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. This was really a lot of fun. Thank you.
And Gary's like, let's go out for drinks now. Let's go. Here we go.
Right.
Bigfoot East, buddy. Bigfoot East.
We're all gonna die.